So good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. This is the afternoon session, and as we all know, it's after everybody's had a lovely lunch, and so I definitely need to do something that is going to ensure I keep your attention throughout the next hour or so. And so at the beginning of this presentation, I'm going to announce that at some point in this presentation, I'm going to stand here naked. The doors are over there for those who would like to leave. But I was asked to give this presentation by TOCICO, and the title was presented by them for me to talk about the development of TOC applications in the service sector. Now, just before I go into this presentation, I do want to just remind us all of the framework against which I hope you can judge the work that we've been doing in the service sector. It's not an easy framework to be judged against, because if you remember Dr. Goldratt's final paper of Standing on the Shoulders of Giants, he made a process very explicit to us. And I remember when I read it, the only thing that went through my body was sheer fear about trying to be measured against that criteria. But what I'm going to try and do is show how we've, over the last 20 or so years, taken some very, very early steps in trying to take a few little tiny walk down that road of trying to find new developments of TOC in new sectors. Now, the first step was the easy one, identify a giant. I can do that one. I can declare that. Dr. Goldratt is the giant here. Identify the enormity of the area not addressed. Well, we have to decide whether or not the service sector has or has not already been addressed by the work of Dr. Goldratt. Yes? In my opinion, much of his work has addressed the issues, but I'm going to present some areas where I think there's an opportunity for us to provide some expansion to that. So that's the area that we're going to see if it's possible to. The third thing is get on the giant's shoulders and understand the solution better than they did. Really? What hope do we have, or do I have, of doing that? Next one, identify the conceptual difference. Again, not perhaps so easy, not a trivial challenge. Identify the wrong assumption, and then just simply carry out a full analysis and develop a full solution for an entire new area that hasn't been looked at before. Yes? So my starting point to say is this is just very early steps down that journey. But let's start by looking at the size of the service sector. This is just some very rough data to show us across the world how much money is associated with the service sector and what percentage of GDP is involved. And I think it's fair enough to say that it is a big area, yes? But the question is it a big area with any conceptual difference? It's also bigger in some countries than others. If you look at my own country, we gave up making things many years ago. So the service sector is definitely an important part of our own economy. And you'll know that my own interest over the last few years, or 15 years, has been in the healthcare industry. And you can see from the numbers there, it's only $6.458 trillion at the last count, so about 10% of the global GDP. So it does seem to be an area of considerable size. The health budget in my own country is about 110 billion each year is spent on healthcare. So it gives you a size of what we're looking at. Now, Ellie also gave us the challenge of making TOC the main way of managing organisations, and clearly the service sector has many organisations in it. I put the picture of the globe on it because I want to limit the scope to making TOC the main way of managing organisations on this planet. Yes, so I'm not prepared to go any further than this planet. Although I did see on the television the other day that there was a project for take man to the Mars, and I was thinking, well, that would be an ideal example for TOC, but not under my scope. So the first attempt I ever made at applying TOC to the service sector was actually when I was employed in this organisation called Ashridge Management College. Actually, my office was in the front there, and it's a business school which was developed to create and disseminate knowledge around the world. It's a place that Ellie held very close to his heart. And I saw Ellie for my very first time in the early 80s, and during that period of time, I was a very young person. This is about 30 years ago, and I didn't have any clients. Yes, I was just a lonely researcher in this business school. And so the very first place I tried to apply the theory of constraints in the service sector was in my own organization. And actually that's my very first point that I'd like you all to think about, because I think we can learn a lot from applying TOC in our own organizations and the way we manage our own organizations. In this instance, we had the simulators which we were taught about. We were taught the measurement systems, and Ellie introduced the concept of a thought-based experiment. And that was really the only material I had to try and apply the ideas in this service industry. Now, in fact, some of it was relatively straightforward, yes? Actually, because in terms of measurements, I found a measurement system that was very similar to that of many other organizations. I could look up the selling price. Actually, the raw materials was really only the food that we fed the participants with. So the throughput was an extremely high number and a very high percentage of selling price, yes? In some instances, it was well over 95%, yes? And what we did in the very early days in that first application is we looked at throughput per constraining unit. And this was very early days, and at that particular time, the constraining unit was the bedrooms in which we could house the various participants. And I remember presenting this data to Dr. Goldratt, and it was fascinating to see that some of the programs had a throughput per constraint that was more than 10 times that of other programs. And actually, it helped us to make big impact on the profitability of the organization by really doing nothing more than adjusting the product mix according to this simple criteria of contribution per constraining unit. And actually, we took the profitability of that organization from what was really just no more than break even to actually quite high levels of return on sales. And actually, it got me promoted as well, which was another good part of the story. But the other thing that we did in this environment is we did our first market analysis. And I had the job of trying to work out what the market share we had at that particular time. And I used the process that Ellie taught me, which was really to do an experiment in your head and try and evaluate the size of the market. I was not prepared to go and do all the normal data gathering. So what I did is I simply got hold of the capacity of all of the business schools in Europe. I just added up the number of bedrooms that they had, and I worked out how much time in any one year could a manager spend using that constraint, of which it was of our particular organization at the time. And actually, the answer came out that we had the capacity in the industry to give every manager in Europe 42 minutes of management development every 10 years. Yes? So it became very obvious that actually the market was massive, was huge, was infinite relative to our current view of the world. And to be honest, that was a lesson for me that I learned very, very early on about the service sector. Because the more people that went to Ashridge, the more people went to Ashridge. It was self-fueling in creating a marketplace. And that's something that I'll look back on when I look at a number of lessons learned about the service industry. but a very, very first go. And it was a go in our own company, which is perhaps an interesting lesson. The next go actually was while I was still at Ashridge, and it was an opportunity that was given to me by a man called Bill West, who is now a partner of mine at QFI Consulting. And for me, he is the guy that deserves the credit amongst the TOC community about who was the first person who was brave enough to actually try and apply TOC in the service sector. He'd been on an Ashridge program, this was the mid-80s, and he'd heard me talk about TOC at that time. It wasn't even called TOC, it was still called OPT at that particular moment in time. And he was a manager in this financial services organization, and he enabled us to go and have a first go at applying the principles. Now actually this is where, for me, is a really good example where a lot of the standard TOC approach that had been developed at that time just fitted perfectly. We found an environment in the service industries that was really very similar to the sort of factory analogy. There were people processing application forms, and these application forms were getting held up and delayed and causing difficulties for the company to grow its market because of its poor service. In those days, it took 12 weeks to process an application form, and in the mid-80s, applying these ideas with the help of Bill, we managed to reduce it from 12 weeks to 12 hours, which was really nothing more than applying those basic TOC principles at that early stage of the journey. Although I did start to notice that there were some little early signs, some weak signals of some things that were different, which became very interesting. In some of the products, they had something called a cooling off period. Now, this cooling off period was a step in the process which was a legal requirement for the customer to be able to change their mind if the insurance person had sold them something that perhaps they didn't want or didn't really need. Now, in terms of the process, this put a very large, significant chunk of time right in the middle of the overall process, yes? And so when we started to do initial calculations of touch time as a percentage of total time, you could get a number of different answers using exactly the same question, which I'm going to bring up later in my discussion. But it did give us an opportunity to really take the ideas and apply them to a new industry. And actually that work went on for many, many years, and we applied it not just in the production, but in the project management environment, and also teaching many people in the organization the thinking process and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, we couldn't claim any major conceptual difference. Yes, we'd taken what we'd learnt and we'd applied it in this new industries. There were some early signs, but nothing major that we could actually start to see differently or find a new way forward. So the next approach actually still occurred when I was at Ashridge, and that was when somebody said to me on one of the programs, a lady called Avril Dongworth, said to me, "Yes, but Alex, would it be possible to apply these principles into the NHS?" And actually that is about 27 years ago that that question was first asked. I'm very pleased to say she's still a client of ours today, and we're still learning to apply it in the NHS. I've given you some pictures here of a different view of the NHS. It was actually, for those of you that remember the opening ceremony of the Olympics, the best ever opening ceremony of the Olympics, which was in London last summer, where actually, as a nation, one of the things that we wanted to show the rest of the world was how proud we were of our public health system and the benefits of it. Now, in the work that we've done in the health system, for me, it was the first time that we really started to identify some of these early weak signals about a conceptual difference in terms of the application of the theory of constraints. And that came through really us just having a go and learning by having a go. I cannot claim that we did our homework up front in terms of trying to understand what was going on here in the conceptual differences. But one of the things that started to emerge relatively early on in the process was that in a hospital there are two major streams of care, what they call an emergency care stream and what they call a planned care stream. And in the emergency care stream, when we started to explain many of the ideas about TOC, it was the first time I ever really noticed some resistance to the principles and the direction of solution. And most of the resistance came around when we got to the stage of starting to explain the applications, starting to explain things like drum buffer rope and starting to explain things like the critical chain project management process. And one of the reasons why the resistance started to emerge was actually because what was happening was in the solution, the very first step, which was to actually control the release of raw materials into the process, was actually not very practical. Yes? In an emergency stream of care, it's not very easy to say to people, excuse me, we're not ready to release you into the system, or we don't want to release you into the system now. Could you please have your accident tomorrow and come back when it's the right time to release you into our schedule? Yes? So the actual idea of controlling the release became one of the early signals that we had that maybe we should find a different way. There was a hint of something that didn't quite match in terms of what was going on. There were other signs. There were other things that came out of that work in the health sector, which I'm going to go into in a bit more detail later on. But I think it was enough of a signal for us to know if the first step isn't working, then maybe we need to think again. Maybe we need to think differently about how we're going to develop the particular applications. Now, we've done lots of work in healthcare over the last 15 or 20 years, and we've got lots and lots of case studies of all of the results that we've achieved. There's the good, the very good, the bad, and the ugly in there, and they're all things that we can all learn from those experiences. I'm not going to dwell on many of the case studies because I've presented them before at previous conferences. I'm going to try and focus on exactly what the messages have been around trying to apply the differences. Now, the next industry where this issue started to emerge itself was again in the early 90s when we started to try and apply TOC into the legal sector. Now, actually, this came about through a sentence that I was exposed to when I first went to go around my first ever lawyer firm. And I walked in to meet the leading partner of the organization, and he was clearly a real knowledgeable expert about his own industry, and he was also somebody who was recognized as that because he was the head of equivalent to our own TOCICO. He was the chairman of the board of all lawyers in the UK. And I was trying to understand on what basis has he got this prowess, what basis had he got this knowledge and all the rest of it, and standing in the community. And actually, one of the things I learned very early on is his standing in the community was partly due to the number of cases that he was able to have under his control at any one moment in time. And actually, as you were promoted in this industry, you were promoted for the level of inventory that you were holding. The higher the inventory, the higher you got promoted. And what was amazing about this character is you could ask him about any one of 400 live cases underneath his control, without going to the multiple filing cabinets that were in his room, he could say to you exactly the status of that particular case during its process. Yes? So this was an industry that had built up this capability, if you like, and respect for the inventory in its system. And actually, you can imagine the first conversations about maybe it's important to improve flow by controlling, and you don't get much further than that in the conversation. The other thing that was very important about this is the way they won new business. Yes, this was another thing that I learnt about the service sector that can be seen as a first sign of a conceptual difference. In this instance, what they did was they had a massive, massive TV campaign, yes, which was literally on daytime television. Almost every single break, there would be an advert. You've probably all seen them, basically if you've had a personal injury. And they will offer you a payment-free claim if you have a valid accident or something like that, yes? Now, the way this market works is they are spending a very considerable percentage of their money on actually creating that demand in the marketplace, yes? Unless you advertise, unless you make people aware, then actually nothing happens. People don't come to you. At that stage, over 60% of people with a valid claim did not claim. Yeah, so the only way to get them to think was through massive advertising at that particular time. Now, the trouble is, once you've done the advert, you cannot let them stop. They have to go into the front of the process. You immediately have to respond within minutes when they phone up the number at the bottom of the television screen, and you have to force them into the system. Yeah, this is the way it works. Actually, you are legally required in the UK to place them into the system. Not only are you legally required to ensure that the process starts, you are legally required to ensure that they hit declared intermediate objectives within certain timescales throughout the whole of the process. Yes, it is a legal measure. There was a slight aside in this story. When I was working in healthcare, I had the opportunity of being invited to the House of Lords by one of the people who we were working with, who was a peer themselves. And while I was sitting having tea in the House of Lords, there was a bill going through the House of Lords. It just happened to be pure chance around this issue of should they legislate fixed timescales between each and every step of the process. And the Lord I was having a cup of tea with me was asking me which way she should vote. And I said to her, please, please don't vote for these intermediate objectives to be written down in law. Anyway, the final outcome was that there was a majority vote for placing them into law, but I think there was one person that voted against it in that process. So you start to see that there are things happening where it's slightly different. Yeah, some of these timescales were not small. Again, there was not only cooling off periods in here, but there were other examples where actually you had to give the other party X weeks, X months in order to respond, and you weren't allowed to force them to do things any faster than that. Again, at this instance, we're fighting with the law. Another service sector that we've had some very interesting journeys in, and one that's certainly my passion, is the university sector. Yes, one of the things I notice about this sector is if you look at the science parts of a university and you look at the management part of a university, you will see something very different happening. In the science part of universities, they are still fundamentally committed to identifying underlying causes and finding new ways forward. Yes? My challenge to not all, but many of the business parts of universities is they've given up on that and they've gone into commenting on what's happening in reality. Yeah? And for me, this is something that we need to perhaps help them address in terms of their future as organizations. But one of the things we did in the university sector is we took Rami's process, which he developed for the solutions for sales approach, and we taught university lecturers to actually use it to go and win more research contracts and to win more work in industry. Because for me, this was a fantastic way of starting to reconnect them with industry and starting to get them to be engaged in some of the issues that industry was actually struggling with. We did have to add a few elements to the solutions for sales process that Rami had developed. We had to add clothing as part of the solution, because some of them we had to get dressed up to go out to do the sales in the clients. But it was a very, very interesting part of our process of applying this in the sector, and one, again, I'm going to come back to because it's something that I think is an opportunity for many of us to participate in. The final example I'm going to give before I go into the differences in detail is something, again, that we ran into, to be honest, by accident, which is family businesses. Now, you may say to yourselves, they're not service industry, but if you've ever worked in a family business, and a good family business, you will soon learn that making money is not their overriding objective. When your name is on the side of the truck and your children and your children's children see that name plastered around the countryside every day, yes, then actually there's things that are more important to you than just simply making money, yes? And actually what you find in family businesses is they are definitely interested in serving. They're interested in serving the population. They're interested in serving the people who work for the organization, and they're interested in serving the values in which they want to run the company. And if you ever want to really understand a family company, then for me it's seeing how they apply their family values in a broader context is what's very interesting, helping them do that. It's not 90 days in a family company, yes? It's 3 generations they're looking to build for their grandchildren all the way through. And this sense of doing something in service of something else is actually quite an interesting application for the theory of constraints. I've had the privilege of writing a number of family dynasty documents, and those dynasty documents have basically been applying the thinking process to the way the family thinks about surviving through the generations and helping them to understand what their own future reality tree is really about and some of the rules and regulations that they're going to put in about how they manage their family business. Personally, I believe it's something that if the global economy had more family businesses in it, actually it would really help the recovery of the situation that we're now in. So, on that journey, what have we used and what are some of the new things that we've been developed? Well, dependent events, they're alive and well in service industries. Throughput, investment and operating expenses, perfectly good part of the toolkit. The 5 steps have definitely helped. The thinking process has definitely been a core part of it. Some of the applications, drum buffer rope, has been a part of it. The S&T tree process was clearly a way of articulating some of these things. The pillars, standing on the shoulders of giants, all been things that have guided us on this journey of trying to apply TOC into the service industry. But it soon became obvious to me that if we were going to be able to do this on a grand scale, we needed to look a bit deeper into some of the things that Dr. Goldratt had done to try and actually really make TOC the main way of managing in service organizations. Yes? We couldn't just carry on taking the various parts of the things that had been developed and finding where this particular application fitted. We had to be brave enough to try and address some of the areas that perhaps there were some conceptual differences in along that journey. And we had to embark, if you like, on our own process of ongoing improvement. Now, I'd like to start with the S&T tree as the first example, because I was involved and working with Ellie when he was writing a lot of these trees, and for me it's the one thing I'd wished he'd written was how to write the damn things, yes? Because I was around enough for when he, suddenly one would appear after him spending days and weeks working on it, but there was never the manual of how to write an S&T tree. So all I can do in some way is look back and reflect on some of the overall design of these trees and highlight in our own efforts to write our own strategy and tactic trees where we've noticed some of the similarities and differences. Well, clearly choking the release is a key part of one of the trees that we all know well, yes? Now, why was choking the release the first part of the process? Yeah, I remember the fun Ellie had with us all, asking us why should choke the release be the first part. And of course, the beautifulness of the answer is that it actually simultaneously achieves step 1, step 2, and step 3 of the 5 steps. It helps you identify the constraint, it helps you exploit the constraint, and it helps to ensure everything else subordinates to it. So that's why it was a good first step. It does all 3. Damn it, when I can't use it in this environment, in some of these environments, yes? You'll notice how far over to the left it is on the standard trees. Secondly, in the project's S&T tree, freezing is one of the first steps. Again, freezing patience, not a particularly easy way for us to look at applying the S&T tree in this approach, yes? But again, notice just how far over to the left it is as a first step in the process, yeah? Again, if you look at the process of analyzing underlying causes of delay, yes? Actually, only when you've developed the schedule, only when you've implemented the schedule, only when you've got everyone following the drum, you've got the proper buffer management in these standard trees, do you start to systematically identify the underlying causes of disruption and delay, yes? And you'll also notice it's a post-rationalization or a post-analysis of what's going on, yes? After a period of time, you're examining what was the most common underlying cause of delay. Also notice that a lot of the time it's analyzing things that have happened after the event and actually once something was late, yes? So these were some of the things that I noticed when I first started to put together our first strategy and tactic tree for healthcare. And one of the other things, again, you see exactly the same in the project management. Everything is in place before you start to do the analysis of the underlying causes of disruption and delay. So this is where I feel like I have to fulfill my promise. This is the moment where I just feel I have to absolutely be naked, yes, and show you what I think is necessary to try and follow some of these journey. Because, first of all, by the way, I'm wearing a T-shirt of an organization that's based in Holland, which is actually a very, very exciting organization that I've just met that is looking at the development of children, particularly children who are suffering from mental health issues. And I've had the opportunity to start to talk to them about, is there a way of using the way they treat children with some of these issues and actually make it consistent with the way they run their own organization, so that their own organization is a living example of the approach they use. And when I started talking to these people, it was when I started to introduce the concepts of trying to understand the underlying cause and trying to understand the conditions against which the effects exist, that the whole conversation changed instantly with the person who's running this, who's actually a psychologist by background. So I proudly wear their T-shirt with the logo I see you, the child that's there. That's all I'm going to strip off for now, by the way. That's as far as it goes so far. But a little bit more of the naked self, yes? Because in this journey of trying to apply things, one of the things some of the things I'd learned from Dr. Goldratt during the day is that days I'd spent with him is that actually sometimes you have to be prepared to take the difficult road. Yes, sometimes you have to be prepared to let go of everything you've learned and start again and see if you can find your own road to solve some of these problems. The other thing, the first thing I remember actually ever talking to Ellie about was Winnie the Pooh, and that first wonderful opening statement, bump, bump, bump. If only I stopped to think about things, maybe I'd find a different way. Also, the keep calm and do your homework. Yes, how often did Dr. Goldratt tell us to do our homework and do it properly? And finally, and I suppose for me, the naked part was the picture at the bottom right. I'm never good at this. I'm an emotional man. The bit at the bottom right, because up to this part in my journey of trying to apply TOC in the service sector, whenever I'd got stuck, whenever I didn't know what to do, whenever I was feeling blind to the direction moving forward, then I'd just get on a plane, I'd go to Israel, and Ellie would give me the time to talk through what was necessary to find a new way forward, to find a different solution. So I always felt that I had somebody who could lead me through those blind moments. And really, when Ellie passed away, it was the time that we decided to write our own S&T trees, to develop our own software completely, to and do a few other things that I want to talk through with you now. But it was certainly a moment when I thought, well, can I do it? Are we actually capable of doing it? Has Ellie left us enough of a hint about how to follow this approach of standing on the shoulders of giants? Yeah? Would it be possible to create the solutions and move forward ourselves? I also knew, having been around Ellie for a number of years, that the process of creating new ideas was not always the most harmonious of activities, yes? That actually there were times when I think he swore at me many, many times about how stupid I was, and the ideas I'd come up with were so poor, etc. So I knew that it was a challenge if we were going to be able to do this. So it felt to me like we were at a crossroads. It felt to me like we had to decide to take the road ourselves. This is my favorite guitar player. It's a guy called Robert Johnson, who's probably the best guitarist in the world, for those of you that are music lovers. He certainly had his obstacles to finding his journey. As a black musician in his time, he actually used to have to play behind a screen to white audiences because he wasn't allowed to perform in public at that particular time. But he came through those obstacles, and certainly many other people have followed. And if you ever want some inspiration, then it's certainly an album that I would suggest you look at. So, having talked about the concerns and fears, just to make them explicit, we're going to need a strategy and tactics tree. Yeah, we're going to need one for each new industry we go into. We need software to support it. I think we've got in my own organization some good software developers, but can we write a blueprint to be able to make sure that we can do this on a massive scale? We need TOC capability. We need to educate people, not just our own staff, but our clients. And this has to be more than skin deep if we're going to go into a new industry. And the last thing, which was perhaps the most challenging thing, was I certainly learnt through my time with Ellie that actually the best way of getting people to learn is through the deductive process. In a way, he put so much time and effort into writing in a way that enabled people to implement TOC on their own without the help of consultants and without the help of other organisations. And so for me, the biggest challenge was that actually, if we were going to really try and do this on a massive scale, we would have to at least consider attempting to write something in the same style that Ellie did, and not only to write it, but for it to be effective. Now, that's a challenge for everyone in this room, and it's a challenge I want to lay down, that if we believe in a deductive process, then we're going to have to learn how to write material in that manner. So, better get on with it, was the approach. So, we've written our first S&T tree. I'm going to show the high level of it today. All of the detail is beneath. And I'm just going to point out a couple of differences between what we've come up with and some of the things in the standard trees. I'm definitely open to challenge and criticism. I'm not saying we're right. I'm saying this is our first attempt at trying to write this. Actually, one of the things that I noticed that wasn't in Ellie's trees, and I still don't understand why they weren't, so I've had a go at fulfilling this particular part of it, was to actually try and describe in a bit more detail how the consultant is to behave in the process of bringing in this strategy and tactics tree. So these first two boxes on the left-hand side are all about the actual way of behaving in applying these processes in a new industry. Particularly it's an industry where there isn't any previous example, where you cannot use evidence of others as the basis of your argument. Yes? Where you can only use logic and common sense as the basis. The next thing I'd like to highlight is in the approach that we've developed, one of the first differences is that there is no drum schedule that we're creating. Yeah, there is actually, by a schedule, I mean a list that describes when something should start and includes when something should be finished before you go on to the next activity. Now, there is a list, there is one overall patient-centric list which we are asking the hospital to follow, yes? But there is no hint whatsoever of it being a schedule. Yes, it is just nothing more than a list to follow. The other thing that's perhaps different in this is the whole process of ongoing improvement is much, 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 much earlier in the process. So actually, what we're doing is we're using the buffer management process live on day one to help us try and analyze and understand what task and what resource and what task-resource combination is most often causing the most disruption or the most delay to the most patients across the whole hospital. Yes? And actually we're asking that question right from the very beginning. So we're not trying to calm the system down before we ask the question. Yes? And that's always been a concern I've had, is would it work? Would the combination of a simple list and immediate identification of not just the causes of delay, but actually much more emphasis on the causes of disruption during the journey? Because often in this environment, one early activity then causes a cascade of delay right the way through the whole of the process. So actually putting much more emphasis on trying to identify the earliest possible moment when there is a disruption. Yes? Now, of course, if you don't have a schedule with times against it, you have to think again about how are you going to evaluate whether something's a disruption or not. Yes? Because you don't have that time deadline against which you're going to measure things. Yes? Now, we do have one time measure, and that is that we declare a patient-centric discharge date for each patient. So we say if every other resource in the hospital was totally subordinated to the needs of the patient, how long would it take the patient to recover? And so we can measure performance against that date, yes? But we can't actually do it in a relative way of each task against that date. Yeah? So we have to find a way of seeing if we can identify deviation without a starting point to measure it. Yes? And that's been what these boxes here over on this part of the S&T has been all about. Yes? And actually learning how to use those ideas of buffer management in a much more proactive way in the system. Also, the dealing with the no choking and no freezing. Yes, if you look at the parallel assumption and the tactic, yes, it gives some very, very explicit actions that need to be taken. 5.111.1, the very, very first thing that we should be doing. Yes, and actually, you know, what are we going to do when we can't actually achieve that? Yes, when that's not a practical first step. And so what we've done, and I've shown this diagram before, is basically all we've said is, well, let's start with that clinically based planned discharge date. By the way, doctors absolutely love this. The moment you say a patient-centric, clinically led list, yes, in other words, you're declaring a sequence in which patients can be looked at, yes, where it's clinically based, it's patient-centric and it's clinically led, then there is absolutely zero buy-in, difficulties with achieving that, yes? And all we've done is we've then started to see, as tasks emerge, exactly what most often causes the most disruption or the most delay. Now, this as tasks emerge is very, very important. In a hospital on any one day, there are typically something like the opportunity for 40,000 different SKUs to appear at the front door. Yeah, 40,000 SKUs. The only trouble is you have no idea which ones. Yes, you know the volume actually quite well of the total number of SKUs. That's quite predictable. But the mix within it is actually surprisingly unpredictable. Yes? So of those 40,000 SKUs, something like 400, 500, 1,000 might walk through the door on any one day. Even when they walk through the door, you won't know what they are. It's only as the analysis starts to unfold that you are able to categorize them into any particular part of care. Yes? And so in terms of identifying which task is most often causing the most delay across the most patients, it's not even as if you can create a plan at the beginning of the journey. You have to allow that plan to unfold and emerge as the diagnosis of the patient unfolds and emerges. Now, when you've got this happening on many patients in parallel, yes, then the only thing you can really hold on to is that task-resource combination. Yes? Which task carried out by which resource is most often causing the most disruption to the most patients? Which task, now 40,000 SKUs, each SKU could have 20, 30, 40 tasks, yes? If you try and identify every single task for every single SKU, you are going to be here forever, yes? So you have got to try and identify generic task-resource combinations that are going to be valid in this environment, yes? And it's the task and the resource that's actually most interesting. Because when you do an analysis of task-resource combination, what you often find is there's one task that a resource does that is always causing a delay or is a high often chance of causing a delay, and yet that resource carries out other tasks which never cause delay. So you cannot look at it just at the resource level. You have to look at it at the task-resource combination level if you're going to actually try and understand. Because, you know, bad multitasking was invented in this industry, yes? Cherry picking is just it's what they've been trained to do as a doctor for many years. They love it. Yeah, which patient is the most interesting one to treat next? Yeah, in terms of the approach. Yes. So being able to answer that question became a driving part of our whole development of the S&T tree. All of the software that we've developed, every part of the education is bringing that right to the front of the analysis. The other thing that we've learned is that on time is not particularly important. Let me try and explain. A patient's ready to go when they're ready to go. Even if you come up with a planned discharge date, you're almost definitely going to be wrong. Yeah? The patient will either take less time to recover or the patient will take more time to recover than your original estimate. The thing you know is your estimate is incorrect. So unless you regularly update that planned discharge date, then actually you're going to be never going to be able to focus in on what's the right thing. Yeah? Now what we're doing is we're not updating it purely and simply because of a delay. We're only updating it if there's a change in the clinical recovery rate of the patient. Yes? Also, early can be as annoying as late in this environment. We started doing work in the outpatient streams of hospitals where basically you're trying to manage the diaries of hundreds of doctors seeing thousands of patients. And one of the things that we learnt in this process is that there are many times when a patient is booked into the system early because there wasn't the right time for them to be booked in. As a consequence, another patient becomes late. Yeah, so we see this early seen as a good thing, and it isn't necessarily a good thing. So we've also introduced a buffer management system where we measure the deviation for early as being as interesting as late. And I can't tell you how many graphs and how many moments I've had the joy of presenting to an outpatients team where the number of early appointments multiplied by the days that they were early is almost exactly the same as the number of appointments that were late multiplied by the days they were late. Yes? So a lack of synchronization there in terms of that process. Yeah? The other thing that we've done is we've embarked on writing a second S&T tree, which is how to carry out an analysis. Yeah, because if you're going to use analysis as the basis of your approach, then actually we started to realize that maybe we don't know the rules of how to do an analysis. How do you actually determine whether there's been a change in throughput or not in an environment where planned discharge dates are being altered on a daily basis because of changes in clinical recovery times? Yeah, the whole concept of measuring throughput on a day becomes questionable. Yes? It may have gone up today, but it may have gone up only because patients recovered early. Yeah? It may have gone down today, but only because patients are taking longer than they were supposed to recover. Yeah? It's not necessarily a clear measure in that sense. Yes? Also, we started to look at what does the equivalent measures for investment. We talk about inventory in manufacturing. Well, it's the equivalent is length of stay in a hospital. Yes, how long was the patient in the system for? Yes, and then there are many derivatives of that we can look at to create a whole new form of analysis. Have they stayed longer or shorter than they were supposed to, etc. Again, changes in operating expenses. In this environment, operating expenses are a very, very high percentage of throughput, yeah, and revenue. So actually you have to think again about the use of additional resource in terms of solving, should I spend more money on extra OE in order to increase throughput in the short term? All of these things become very interesting to try and resolve. And the other thing is, how the hell do you compare throughput, investment and operating expenses in this environment? Yeah. The concept of productivity is not as straightforward as you might have imagined. And a box that I've had great fun in working in how do we decide whether we need a new application or not? If there's already a brilliant TOC application developed by Dr. Goldratt, why the hell should we try and mess around with it? Why don't we just use it? Yeah? When do we need to consider the development of something different in that approach? And then how do we carry on and improve things? Now this S&T tree is definitely, in my eyes, been the most challenging thing I've ever tried to write. It looked straightforward when I started. It looked very, very obvious. We've all been taught TI and OE 1,000 times, yes? But how do you actually carry out an effective analysis with those measures, yeah, in this particular environment? So this one is carrying out an analysis in the healthcare environment. I would think it's a great challenge for other people to try and do it for other industries, yeah, just to see how you use those 3 measures to identify the underlying causes, etc. In the legal sector, well, very interesting moment here when, is this an operations environment or is this a project environment? Well, the typical lead time from this example that I've given you up on the right-hand side here is that the total time is 234 days, yes? If you look at the touch time of the one main resource that is involved in this, then it's definitely less than 10%. The fee earner actually spends a day or 2 on processing this case throughout those 234 days. An hour here, 2 hours there, 3 hours there, etc. Probably no more than 48, 60 hours during the whole process. Yes? However, if you look at the process, there are also moments where I talked about earlier where there are these fixed time buckets that you have to accept. If you include those, then you're definitely in the project environment. Yes, because you're way over 10%. Yeah, so are you in the operations environment or are you in the project environment? Well, I can answer yes to both those questions. So again, it must tell us that there's something that we need to think about in terms of upgrading our understanding of what's the difference between those 2 environments. Yes? Because actually the answer is both are true if you're going to look at it like that. Again, if we look at this, it says choke the release. Yeah? I can't. I can't choke the release. I'd be fighting the law, yes, if I tried to choke the release in this instance, yes? So the only thing I can do is consider how much protective capacity I need or how much capacity I'm going to be prepared to have in excess of demand, just in case I have a good TV campaign, yes? Because in this industry, if I fail to meet one of those service requirements halfway through the process, then actually I have to give the case to one of my competitors. Yes? So taking this stuff on and then not delivering it doesn't only break the law, it fuels your competitor's marketplace. Yes? Now, clearly we have to think again about the whole concept of protective capacity in this environment. Yes? And how much should I actually consider is the right way to do that. Now, I have to be honest, we've been doing this by experimentation. We've basically used dynamic buffer management as the vehicle to try and establish exactly what the right level of capacity is. The only good news is the clients we've done it with are growing faster than the clients we haven't done it with. I don't know whether we've got it right or not, but the effect is there to say that we're heading in the right direction in terms of this. But again, it's just an example of where we have to stop and think again about what's appropriate if we're going to develop TOC into these new environments. Yeah? I suspect that problem will occur in many, many, many other service environments. Yes? There's a new hairdresser shop that's opened about 1 mile from our offices. And there's 2 young girls that have opened this hairdresser shop in a town where there's already too many hairdresser shops. And they left school with I don't know, not many qualifications, I suspect, yes, but they are entrepreneurs and opening this hairdresser shop, yes, and I only have my hair cut there because it gives me an opportunity to see if we can learn about how much protective capacity they need in order to be able to offer incredible service to anyone who wants their hair cut immediately without any booking, without anything, so that they can try and steal the market in the local town where they definitely don't have any real right to exist. And it's very interesting just trying to think through that whole calculation about capacity in that environment. Now, as far as the software is concerned, my view is this is the book that you should all go and buy, and you should all read it again and again and again. I don't know how many copies were originally sold, but in my opinion, you should go buy it now, yes? Because without that, there's no way I could have written the software specification for everything that we've applied in the service environment. First of all, I don't know how to write software specs. It's something I know zero about, yes? And secondly, the only thing I could find that makes sense was this book and the 6 questions. So my advice to you is if you are going to try and apply TOC into a new sector and you need software to help you, then go buy the book. It's brilliant, by the way. It's absolutely brilliant. It's a really, really good read. It's fascinating. The first time I read it, I didn't understand a word of it, I have to be honest. Ellie asked me about it, but it was only when I had the need that I understood it. Yes, and I think that's an important lesson for us. But I would suggest you take it with you on any new environment. Commitment to education. Well, if you're going to go into a new industry, you're going to have to educate your customers and you're going to have to educate your staff. Yes. So far, what we've done in this journey is we've started by launching 2 master's programs with Nottingham Trent University. The first is a master's program in TOC in healthcare. Great pleasure to see it's a master's degree in the theory of constraints in healthcare. Yes, validated by the university. We've now had 4 cohorts go through that program. And for me, we've now got a group of people out there in hospitals who really have understood and have been validated by a university that they are masters in that particular program. Yeah? The other thing we've done is we've launched a master's degree in our own organization, and we've said if you want to be a master's in TOC, then you should join our organization and become a master's in TOC in consulting. So we have a second degree, master's degree in the theory of constraints in consulting, which is not just in healthcare, but it's in looking at every single industry. And for me, it was a good place to start because it meant if we developed all of the material for those 2 programs, it would be the building blocks. We'd have everything we need to create all of the other educational material we need throughout trying to change in all of these other industries. But clearly it's a big commitment. This is our organization, by the way. This is all the lovely people that now work for us. Some of you may recognize some of the people. Here is Alex Dinham. Some of you remember him from Byers. Just married with 5 kids. Actually, with 5 kids just married is the sequence. This is Tam, originally joined one of the very first Odyssey programs with Rocco's daughter, and she's now one of our senior project managers applying theory of constraints in many different industries. And there's probably, if you could look close enough, look at her. This is Tam, by the way. Look, the only person who appears twice in the program, in the photograph. So that's some of the other things. The final thing is this damn novel. Well, I'm proud to announce that I have actually taken up the challenge. I am writing a novel-based book on healthcare. I've called the book Pride and Joy because my hope is that it can help us create pride and joy in our health systems around the world. To me, that's something that we should be very, very proud of, our health systems. It's a good measure of how we see our countries. and we should have joy for everyone who goes through it and works in it. Inspired by my favorite guitar player, Stevie Ray Vaughan, from Texas, and these are the words of the song that helped me to actually think about the whole theme of the book. So the inspiration from the book came from "She's my sweet little thing, she's my pride and joy," which I think is what I'm intending to try and make the health systems of the world, something that we can be very proud of and very enjoy working in. So that's our plan. We're on page 250. It's going to be released this year. We're going to release it in September, October this year, and I hope that you all find it a fun and interesting read. Again, I lay it down as a challenge. I've never, ever written a book before in my life, yes, and I've decided that if we're going to expand TOC into many organizations, many new industries, then we should remember the deductive process is the biggest part of Ellie's success. Yes, the goal was so much part of enabling people to implement TOC without consultants, on their own, and we should all pick up that challenge and find other industries and write other things that would equally attract people. Will we succeed? I don't know, but I'm having a go. So I'd like to leave enough time for questions, and if you haven't got any for me, then I've got some for you. In fact, I've got a whole list here to make sure we run out of time before I have to take any more clothes off. So, any questions? Yes?
On your one chart, favorite chart, you showed patients, a single patient with multiple lines going to the right, to get to the green,
Yes.
yellow, and red. What were the multiple lines and how that fit?
The multiple lines were, for each patient, we basically claim a planned discharge date.
I'll ask the question again.
Okay.
You showed one patient, but it had several lines
Yes.
going across for the zones, and I was a little confused about who those lines were
Okay.
and how you track whether was those different processes that were causing him to be late, or was the actual discharge late the real issue? An interesting way of processing it.
So, what we have is the patient arrives here on the admission date. If it's an emergency patient, then they just arrive. There's nothing we can do about that, yes? On the right-hand side, we have what we call this clinically based planned discharge date, yes? And the real message to the doctors there, and it's a strong message that takes a long time to get through, is we want you to set that date purely and simply on clinical grounds. In other words, if you think about it in TOC terms, we're saying we are going to subordinate everything else to the patient, and we're going to try and find out why we can't. Yes? So that's the distance between the admission date and the planned discharge date. Actually, we have to update it every day. Yes, because the patient may recover faster or slower than anticipated. Yes? The yellow, the brown, the purple, and the cyan colors are basically the tasks that need to be completed in order for that patient to be successfully discharged. Yes? So some of those may be some tests need carrying out. Some of them may be that somebody actually needs to go and check whether when they go home, the home will be in a fit place for them to go back to. You know, they can climb up the stairs or whatever. Other things may be that an MRI scan needs to be done. All of the list of different activities that need to be done to be completed. Yes? They emerge. They're not built as a standard plan. Yes?
So it's not a project plan, it's a we need to do this thing plan.
It's an emerging list at all times.
How come that blue one's so long to start with, if it's a clinically based discharge date?
Because what we do ask is every time they give us a task, we do ask for the remaining duration. So the length of the line indicates the expected remaining duration of the task.
That blue task would generally have been shorter when they started, when they made the plan, but now it's looking longer.
It may have started that long. It may be that the very first time they put up a task, it's going to take longer than it's going to take for the patient to recover. Is it because there's a queue in front of the resource that's carrying out that task? Is it because there's some local policy about how they decide to prioritize patients through that department? Is it because that doctor only comes to this hospital on a Tuesday afternoon and a Thursday morning? There's 1,000 different reasons why it may take that period of time.
Okay, so the blue line is not the touch time, it's the estimate of how long it's going to take it to get through. Okay, thank you very much.
Yes? Any other questions? What is the MDT? Sorry, what we're suggesting here is the MDT line coming through the left. In England, we have something called a multidisciplinary team. And the idea is that we're quite keen for, although this to be patient-centric and doctor-led, we also are quite keen to get other professionals' input into how long it's going to take for that patient to recover. Yes, so that's a multidisciplinary team of people having a view. Yeah? Not to say that doctors aren't always right, but sometimes it's good to get a broader view in that.
Alex, down here front. You said that the task lines are also coupled with the resource?
Yes.
So in delivery, so are you able to differentiate where you've got bottlenecks occurring, where there's resource contention?
Yes, this is why every single task we tag the resource that's carrying out that task, yes? So that we can actually do the analysis to identify if it's a resource issue or whether it's the behavior of a resource issue,
Okay.
yes? Because in the 20 years we've been doing this, I haven't actually found a bottleneck yet. Yes, I've only ever found behavior, this is the way we do things around here, the governance type issues. Yes.
Okay.
Oh, sure.
Right at the back.
Hi, thank you.
In the healthcare application, did you have a mechanism to monitor quality or changes in quality and or rework
Yes.
with improved processes?
Yes, yes. There's a number of ways that we've done that. In our own country, actually the government did it for us in one respect, because if a patient is discharged and then readmitted within X days, then you forfeit the revenue for that patient. Yeah, so that's one way of trying to focus the hospital's mind on not just kicking a patient out the door earlier than is required, just to be able to fit another one in. Yes? So in a way, the law helped us in that particular example. But the other thing that we were able to do was to analyze the difference between what I would call clinical reasons why a patient has been delayed and just simply operational reasons why a patient has been delayed. And what that enables us to do is then to start to analyze differences in clinical practice and start to establish, well, this doctor does it in this way and they seem to be able to treat patients within this time period, whereas another doctor may have a different process which may take shorter or longer. We're not making a judgment about whether shorter is better. It may be that longer is better because the first doctor's compromising the quality of care. But one of the things we have noticed, and has been a massive positive benefit, is by using this sort of TOC logic and evidence-based approach, what the doctors are able to do is to have a clinical discussion based on evidence. Yes, and actually what we've found is that promotes much better teamwork amongst the doctors in terms of discussing best clinical practice, because they've got something to measure it against. And I think that has really, why I think it's so fascinating, is the fact that there's so little resistance from the clinical staff. Yeah. Any other questions? Rami.
The colors, how are you using the colors? For statistical PUGI, for priorities?
The green, amber, red, or the brown,
the buffers colors.
the buffers colors. We're basically using them to help us identify sources of what I call either disruption or delay. Yeah, through the PUGI process. Yes. What's interesting is in some environments, yes, let's say, for example, that the patient is only going to be in the hospital for 4 hours. Yeah, there's a very interesting question, how should you size the buffer? Yes? So in some environments, we actually split the green, amber, red equally over the whole of the journey. Yes? Because actually a patient could go out in a matter of minutes. Yes? And in other instances, we use more standard calculations of the size of the buffer. Yeah? Can I ask you a question?
No, hang on, we got another one,
Okay.
and then you can get that.
I'll come back to Rami then.
Yeah.
Alex, have you ever run the diagrams past what I would call someone in the financial markets? Because what I looked there, it looked like an options trade. And you could sort of use that as another dynamic.
This particular diagram, which is where we identify what task-resource combination is most often causing the most disruption or delay across the most clients, is the one I always show other industries. Yes, it's a question that entices them in very, 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 very quickly into the process. And it is what we use in the financial services sector, and it is what we use in the legal sector. So it is enabling us to very quickly identify the governing behaviors that are disrupting the flow. Yes? And in a way, that's our equivalent to freezing or controlling the release. Yes, absolutely yes. Any other questions?
Oh, now you get one.
Go to my list. So what I've tried to do this afternoon is show our journey around adopting the statements that Ellie wrote about standing on the shoulders of giants. Yes? And I would just like us to go back to think about those questions. Identify a giant. Well, I think as an organisation, that's been pretty easy. Yeah? Identify the enormity of the area not addressed. Well, hopefully I've been able to give you some insight into how we've, let's face it, not always identified, but sometimes run into areas not addressed. Yes? Some people have asked me, why did I go into healthcare? In fact, the person that's asked me that most often is in a green jumper at the back of the room there. And I don't honestly know the answer, other than it ran into me. Yes? But it was definitely an area where it didn't seem to fit. Yeah? We had to think again. And I suppose that's what I'm asking you to think about, is to keep your eyes and ears open to just that early sign that maybe there is an opportunity here. Don't fool yourself, there may not be a conceptual difference. Many of the things we've applied have been absolutely what Dr. Goldratt taught us through all those years, yes? What I've tried to do is notice some moments, some nuances, some issues where perhaps we've had to learn to do some things differently, yes? Am I yet able to get on the giant's shoulders and under their solution better than they did? Absolutely, definitely no. What I'm hopefully doing is trying to learn about some of those assumptions by applying it in a new industry. And that's my real message, if you like, is applying this stuff in a new industry does help you to understand the assumptions upon which the solutions were based. Yes, it actually is a good way of learning about TOC. Can I articulate the wrong assumptions, and can I provide you with a full analysis of the solution? Well, not yet, not by a long way, but it's a journey and it's taking a long time, I know. But I hope for our 10th anniversary we are going to have an S&T tree, actually two, one for healthcare and one for how you do the analysis in healthcare. We are going to have a complete piece of software that can be applied in any hospital. We are going to have the education material which we can show how to educate people in this industry about these approaches, and we are, I promise, going to have the novel to try and show people through the deductive process. So that's what we're trying to do in that process. Now, I just want one question. It's if not now, then when? My question is, what I've tried to do today is to provoke you, yes, to provoke you to look at new industries. Yes, I'm going to be a little controversial to end. I don't want to hear any more stories about people applying this in healthcare. I actually want to hear many more stories about them applying it in new industries. Yes? That is the way to make TOC the main way of managing organizations. Of course, we have to spread this knowledge everywhere, but let's also pick up the challenge, find new industries. It's good fun. I've learned a very good income out of trying new industries. Please have a go at it, is my plea. Thank you very much. I ran out of time to take the rest of my clothes off, by the way. So that's
Alex, that's a book that's been autographed by all the members of the board in appreciation for the, I think I gave you something else there too, in appreciation for your time and efforts in putting this together, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And for those of you that are still interested in talking about TOC and healthcare,
I am.
Bill is going to be meeting Wiesbaden 1 and 2. So immediately after last session, Wiesbaden 1 and 2, down the hallway. Okay? Wiesbaden. Wiesbaden. All right, very good. We have a half-hour break, and we will see you at 1:15.